Are you curious about bodies, pleasure, and possibilities? And what about curious about what others are up to on the planet when it comes to pleasure, sex, and play? Have you considered what pleasure can do for your life, your body, and your bank account? Do you know something magical, delightful, and out of this world orgasmic is not only possible for you, but totally available to you? If you're ready to be the magical, sexual, sexy beast you know you can be, and you just need the tools to get there, you're in the right place. Now, here is the host of The Pleasure Zone, sex, relationship, and intimacy coach and holistic health practitioner, Milica Jelenic.
Oh, welcome, my sweet pleasure seekers. This is a topic today that I'm going to be talking about that was literally sparked because I was like, "Ugh." I openly opened the newspaper because normally I don't talk about that and I hide that information now. I opened the newspaper, our local newspaper, this week's edition, and the community press of Belleville and County and all that jazz. And in it, there's an article about a new men's health cream to assist with libido and yada, yada, yada. Okay, so I'm really glad that men have special meds to help them with libido. And I'm really glad these things exist because I do know that all of this is important. Sexual vitality is very important for the way we think of ourselves, but also sexual vitality is also something to look at, that if you do have certain conditions, that you also need to look at root causes. Like, are there, do you have cancer of the prostate? Is that what causing erectile dysfunction? Do you have heart issues? Do you have neurological issues? Have you had any traumas to your body? A lot of factors can impact erection, right? So I think when everything else has been figured out, even addiction, like overconsumption of alcohol can affect erections, etc., and other drugs. So, when all those other issues have been looked at and if none of those are at play, and then you want to give somebody medication to help with erectile dysfunction, absolutely. Now, this article that I read was actually about this annoyed me so much, and I'm give you guys a summary of it. It was about helping men who have desensitized penises because they get frustrated because they last so long without ejaculation. Ladies, not just ladies, vulva havers of the world, vagina and vulva owners of the world, raise your hands if you've never actually had an orgasm. 95% of you? 90% of you? Because we know the orgasm gap is huge. We know that. Done a show on it about 6 episodes ago, the orgasm gap. We know this. Now, we also know that things happen as we age, and that can also affect libido. Talked about that on a show recently as well. I think it was like last week's episode on menopause. And guys, I just found it so effing annoying. Because the first thing I saw when I read that was like, oh, desensitized penises. Fantastic. That means we're going to have longer sex, more lasting sex, because there's going to be more available space before the person actually gets off. But no. This is a problem. Men have had a problem with this, and they're in pain, guys. They're blue balled. There's a lot of pain happening. So, for the women with vulva congestion, F you, screw you. We don't care if you have congestion of your vulva or your uterus we don't care if you have any genital congestion that's causing you pain for freaking years. We don't care. But guys, your penises are desensitized. OMG, we're going to have to invest millions of dollars in research into creating a cream that is essentially, and now I'm going to be a real J-ass about this. Jack, I should have said Jack A, right? I just did the opposite. Anyway, so what we could have looked at was all the different creams that are sold in sex shops. But no, you know what we're going to do? So they created a cream to help bring back sensitization, to help bring the sensitivity of the penis back. And it smells just like cinnamon because it probably has something in it that smells like cinnamon, maybe cloves or I don't know, but it's a warming oil, kids. Warming oils have been around for quite a long time. But you know what? If you get the FDA to approve a warming oil and you get to have a prescription for it, that warming oil that you could buy at your sex shop for like $10 can now probably be bought for only $750. No, I actually don't know the cost of these warming oils. And again, I'm not mad that the warming oils exist. What I'm upset about is the lack of information out there for women and the lack of resources that women have for these similar issues. When we're talking about sexual dysfunction, women have so few resources. They might be like, oh, you know what? Your vagina's got atrophy. You have vaginal atrophy. So we're gonna get you dilators. Oh, you mean the dilators can't go in? Okay, so we're gonna have to get you lube. Oh, you mean you're allergic to the lube? Sorry, we have nothing for you. Yeah, this is just gonna be your life. We can't do anything for you. Unless you go to somebody who's more in the holistic field, who can look at the overall body, the whole body, rather than your vagina and your vulva as a separate entity. Um, you're going to get a lot of just people throwing their hands up and not knowing what to do for you or saying, that's normal at your age. We'll just slip a little of this in there and a little of that. Oh, you mean the estrogen cream didn't work? Oh, you mean the estrogen and progesterone didn't work? Oh, we're so sorry. We got nothing for you. Oh, holy Hannah, it drives me mad. I have a lot of women who come to me who have these similar issues. So when I read this, I thought, for the love of God, can we at least divert, if we even diverted 1/10 of the money that is going into research for men's sexual function, and we diverted that into the function of, vagina havers, can you imagine the difference it could make for the vagina havers of the world? Massive difference. Okay, so one of the other things, and I'm just going to talk a lot and I'm going to need some water. Hold on. Okay, so one of the things that got me thinking, oh, but before I go on too far, you guys probably are like, who is this chatty bitch? Anyway, my name is Milica Jelenic, and I'm a holistic health practitioner as well as a sex and intimacy coach. And I have been host of the Pleasure Zone for over 11 years, where I talk all about sex, intimacy, pleasure, and all things in the spectrum of pleasure, including all the things that can take away our pleasure, like trauma and different hormonal effects on the body and different things, whether it's from things external in our environment or things like family, like relationships, and even like where you live and all that, work stresses and all that, to internal stressors. So we talk about all that on this show. If I have not talked about a topic that you're interested in, please let me know. Send me an email through my website, milicajelenic.com. I have actually had quite a few emails that come through with requests. And when I do the show based on the topic request, it is always a pleasure to be able to do something for my listeners. And I'm grateful for every single one of you. And some of you have been around a really long time. and I actually get to have conversations with you. It warms my heart, and I'm so grateful. And you guys all know who you are. So, because I've actually spoken with you. All right. So, one of the things that kind of like, as I was going through, like, what did I remember coming up in the world around, men's health, and like the big one, the big V, Viagra. When did that come out? And the funniest thing is, like, my first memory of Viagra was that I was, I was just turned 23. And at the time I was a nanny, and I was taking, I took a week off that year or something like that. I took a little holiday, and it was, I think April of 1998. And I'm sitting in an airport in Houston, Texas, waiting to get over to Guatemala. And I was supposed to only have like a 2-hour layover, but we had hours and hours. It was like 6 or 8 hours extra layover because there had been either a murder or an attempted murder in Guatemala City for a religious figure, and I think he was a cardinal. Anyway, so everything got stopped. And I made a lot of friends there in that airport. I made a friend with a diplomat. I don't know, I made like so many random friends while I was there waiting. And while we were waiting, up on the screen surrounding us, like the three TV screens in the waiting room, all had news nonstop, like running news about Viagra, the new miracle drug. And this went on for hours and hours. Like, I don't remember any other single bit of information that came through that newscast that day except for Viagra. And it was so nonstop. I think by the end of it, I was like, ugh, I'm so bored. So it was in 1998 that the FDA approved Viagra, but we are now in 2025, 27 years later, nearly 3 decades later. And do you think that there is a standardized libido treatment for women? What was that? You said no? That's correct. There isn't. Ding, ding, ding. You are correct. There is no standardized treatment for women's libido. What there is a tend to go to is to get your estrogen and progesterone checked and then have that balanced correctly. And I'm all for having balanced hormones. So yes, however, men aren't having to take necessarily uh, hormone injections. No, they're just being given these other things, which Viagra, from what I understand, and I don't have the literature right in front of me, but from what I remember, it was actually originally used as like a heart medication, but then they found out it got the blood pumping in all kinds of areas. We don't have that for ladies. And in fact, I don't think ladies should be taking Viagra. I'm not really sure what it would do unless it gets the blood pumping to the clitoris. But we currently don't have a variant on that is approved for vulvas. So isn't that messed up? Anyway, I know I was like on a bit of a scanty rant there for a second, but I don't know, things get me kind of like really annoyed at times where the I think there's a huge disparity there. Like there's been centuries of demonizing women's sexuality, because I can't talk, but yes, I can speak just fine. Um, yeah, like basically demonizing it, maybe more than centuries, maybe millennia. But today I'm going to kind of take you back to the last about 200-ish years because some of the actual advancements and where they started to even consider looking at women for health were started in the last couple hundred years. So we will be looking at that today. We'll be looking at things like, the the hysteria movement. I'm going to call it a movement. I don't know if that it was a movement, but I'm going to call it that, the hysteria movement because there was just like a lot of people working on that towards, hey, hysteria, it's the answer. What I do like about the time of hysteria being like the every woman has hysteria. Oh, she cried. Hysteria put you into a home for, but not just a home. We're gonna, put you in a sanatorium because there's something wrong with you. What I do like about hysteria though is the beauty of the fact that they started masturbating women. Like uh, and there are two schools of thought on this, is that there was discussion that was a possibility, but it didn't really happen as often as we hoped it did. But that there was an advancement that kind of began to create what we now know as vibrators, but they were huge devices. So some say it was more like a myth that doctors did that, and that it was like written about in one medical journal as a possibility, and it just got exploded like a century, So say that was the 1870s, it was like 110 years later, somewhere in the 80s, that people started talking about that as if it was a common fact. But probably if we were good time travelers and went back, that might not have actually been the case. So we will talk about a whole bunch of medical myths and other fun things and why women have been so ignored. Okie doke. So you're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show, with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for The Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Are you a subject matter expert? Are you here to share your expertise with an audience waiting to hear from you in only the way you can deliver? Are you ready to have your voice amplified across the airwaves? Inspired Choices Network has a global radio platform streaming to millions of people across the world. Professionally produced and supported by an accomplished team every step of the way, you can broadcast from anywhere in the world, knowing your voice matters, and we ensure it is delivered with ease and efficiency. Eager to hear your message, the world awaits. Contact us today to become an Inspired Choices Network radio host. Email become a host at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com.
This is The Pleasure Zone with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@milicajelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. So for fun, I thought I would kind of get a bit of a brief through history, just so you guys can like see, back to the 1800s anyway, just to get a sense of how much neglect there has been, or misinterpretation and misunderstanding there has been about women's sexual health and women's libido, and the importance to look at it instead of saying, oh, well, women aren't interested in sex anyway, or, yeah, just going through changes, so who cares? Going through changes, that one's for you, Ozzy. And for people who don't know that reference, Ozzy Osbourne song, Going Through Changes. Anyway, late 1800s to like the early 1900s, so we'll say like the Victorian era. Although it's probably slightly pre-Victorian, so Victoria's daddy, and then slightly after, which would have been Edward, her son. So we've got Victorian to Edwardian, and then slightly after Edwardian, because I think Edward died in like 1910 or something. He was only around for 9 years, 1901 to 1910. Victoria died in 1901. Anyway, he wasn't there for long. So we've got his mama's era, his era. And why we refer to that is because, colonization and the British Empire at that time pretty much stretched across from one end of the world to the other. So in reference to that timeline, we're going to use the colonization timeline on that. You're welcome. So in the 1870s, actually in the 1870s in the US, there was a law called the Comstock Laws, which started to criminalize the distribution of contraceptives and information in general about sexuality. And that was all around helping women and their sexual health. So just making it criminal. And there are still states in the US today that have sex toys. If you buy sex toys or if you sell sex toys, it's it's against the law. So I don't know at what level I don't know if it's federal or state laws, but it's against the law in several states. Oh, so it's not federal, yeah. It's the state laws. So, and I don't know what like punishments there are. And I don't think they've changed since I did a show about that several years ago, like strange sexual things that are like illegal acts you hadn't expected. I can't remember the title of the show, frankly. I've done like over 500 shows. So, anywho, um, we we're looking at the making everything about sexuality criminal, learning about it. Contraceptives are criminal. So you can't use those. Women were still finding ways though, because even in Victorian England, in the Victorian pharmacist, if you've ever watched the BBC has great programs, and there was a series about the Victorians and different things of Victorians, and there was one called the Victorian pharmacist, and the Victorians still tried to create contraceptives out of sheep's, I think. Sheep's or lambs. Anyway, sheep or lamb intestines, and they would create condoms out of those. So clean them up, hang them to dry, yada yada. And they were also doing other things for aborting babies as well with different herbal things. So as much as there were laws in the US that had that against the law, there were parts of the world that were still looking for options. But it wasn't until much later. I don't know if any of you have ever watched The Midwives, but they do have a lot of references to things that were like actual true historical things in there. One of the things in Called the Midwives was also about contraception, and that wasn't coming available even in the 1960s. There was a really big stink about that for women taking contraception back then, the pill. So we're talking like now back to the Victorians. We're looking at that age of hysteria and like, oh, every woman who has a tear or who doesn't want to have sex or wants to have too much sex, or if she has anxiety, or if she's crying because her family died and maybe the Crimean War, I don't know. Like everything could be a reason why the woman has hysteria. And usually it would be treated with things like pelvic massage, but and like the early invention of the vibrators. I mean, like again, there's like a misunderstanding of that because I've also read a lot of things by people who've done a lot of research on that, and so there's sort of like a misunderstanding there. I think we think that that's a true solid fact, but there's more information we're missing there. So there's that, and hysteria. So if you look at the word hysteria and like hysterectomy, they have like that root, and it's all in reference to the womb. So like a hysterectomy, the removal of the womb, and or we could just say the uterus, right? So if and sometimes there would be an extreme that women would have body parts that would end up being removed. Surgeries back then, not the best idea, especially when it comes to hygiene, especially since hygiene wasn't really well known or well kind of accepted until I think 1870s, something like that, with Florence Nightingale. And so, yeah, that's a whole other story because there were other nurses on the battlefield there that never got acknowledgement. But it's not about Florence today, although she was one of my first fancy dolls I ever had. So that's a little side note. I still have that fancy doll. Anyway, Florence. So what we know about that period, the Victorian Edwardian period, is that we had a lot of misinformation. And the thing is, we still have a lot of misinformation and we still lack a lot of information. And we go from like lack of information to now at least there's conversation. So through the decades, things have been changing. There is, in the 1920s, there starts to be a birth control league that's created. Then there's studies starting to emerge. There's people acknowledging that the female orgasm exists. But also not that far after that, we have Grey's Anatomy taking the clitoris out of anatomy books because, oops, we forgot. I don't know. But it was completely misunderstood. What a crap show. So there becomes a little bit more interest in women while, there's wars going on and the women are taking over the positions of men. They're kind of having to step into roles that are more the man roles. All of a sudden there's a bit more interest in women until the men come back, and then there's like an extreme shift that goes back again, making sure that everybody has those 1950s Leave It to Beaver values. So if you don't know what that reference is, Leave It to Beaver is a show in the US where you have the mom who's baking all day long in her pretty dress and her shoes, and used all the rules of the 1950s housewife to make sure that she was pretty and perfect for when her husband came home to cook him this perfect meal and have her perfect children. So it's like really unrealistic. Although my grandma was so much like that. She, wore the dresses even around house while cooking and stuff. I think it was just what women did. My grandma was also like a lady who never left the house without lipstick, and her lipstick was like Revlon or something and had a very specific smell. And she used the same color lipstick my entire life, and apparently even prior to that. So probably the same red since like the 1950s, and maybe it was the Victory red. It might have been the one that the women were wearing in rebellion. I don't know. Maybe she was like secretly a rebel her whole life. I don't know. Anyway, so we've got the 1950s coming and all this shift to like regular values. But what also happens is we have some researchers popping up. So Masters and Johnson start their research together in the 1950s. Alfred Kinsey's doing his research. The birth control gets approved in 1960, but it's not approved everywhere. That's like approved in North America, but there's still debate over it in many countries. And in some countries, it's still not available. So there's that. And then we go to the 60s, we got like the sexual revolution happening, and women are actually allowed to acknowledge that they're sexual beings. And Masters and Johnson were actually pretty instrumental in that. And again, anytime I mention them, I also like to have a caveat that all the work they did wasn't exactly, all the research they put out there wasn't exactly sound. But a lot of their research was, and the research that wasn't sound, they did later declare that it wasn't. And the research that wasn't sound had to do with research on non-heterosexual sexual responses. So yeah, there was that. They did some stuff that was, I think that it was Masters who tried to prove that, and don't quote me on this because I don't have that again like right in front of me. I think it was Masters though that tried to prove that you could have conversion therapy work for gay men, and then realized later that that wasn't true. And I think he did denounce that. So, but what they did do was in their study, the human sexual response, was they were able to map out female sexual arousal, how there's, arousal, and then there's different stages of arousal. And so you got like climax and plateau and all the different, I think they had 4 or 5 stages of arousal. And it was their study was very, very clinical. Like they even put like electrodes on people and things and measured heart rates and did all kinds of stuff. If you've never seen it, there was a special that was put out, I'm not sure when, maybe in the early 2010s, 2015, maybe something like that. That was, I think it's called The Masters. Yeah, I think it is called The Masters. A great series if you're interested in all things sexual research and history. It's a really great show. So go enjoy that. So when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the more modern stuff from the 70s to the early 2000s. And I think you guys might all cry a little bit because we haven't had that much progress. So we need progress in this area. We need funding. We need people to actually choose to do research. And then when they choose to do the research, we need the institutions to fund this stuff, because women count. And why do we think they don't? It's because they historically weren't the breadwinners with the money who were paying for these things, and they historically weren't the investors. However, we are now the investors, and things are changing. So let's invest. All right, let's head to the next commercial break. You're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show, with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for The Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
How wonderful would it be to carry your favorite Inspired Choices Network host with you throughout your day? Well, now you can. Inspired Choices Network now has its very own mobile app. Our free app offers live streaming shows, along with thousands of podcasts and TV episodes. Our shows cover a wide variety of topics. Whether you're waking up with us, carrying us through the day, and taking us to bed with you, we're always here for you to enjoy. We're easy to find. Just search for Inspired Choices Network in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store.
This is The Pleasure Zone with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@MilicaJelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. As we are moving in through the ages and stages of history of who's actually checked out women's sexual health, where has there been neglect? There's been so much neglect, misunderstanding. Some people have actually invested in checking out women's sexual health, like Kinsey did too, but his was more the Kinsey research was more broad in that it was looking at just sexual behavior in general, but it did look at sexual behavior in the human female. So yay. His work kind of emphasized some of the biases we have today, but it also opened some things up. But it was groundbreaking work. So thank you for that. And there's all kinds of stuff that's come out of that work too. So in the 1970s, there starts to be more talk about bodies, and Betty Dodson, I think, well, maybe her clinic started in the late 60s, but Betty Dodson was out of New York, and she had lots of clinics where you could learn about sexual health. She was like the forerunner before Regina Thomas Howard. And Betty Dodson, if you've ever, I think it was on Sex, Love, and Goop with Gwyneth Paltrow, one of the Netflix series, where one of the original series that she did on health, and a woman went into the Betty Dodson clinic to learn more about her sexuality and explore her pleasure. So she was, and she is dead now, but she was the pleasure guru, and she died in 2020 at November of 2020, the age of 91. She was, again, pretty amazing. So, now that Betty's gone, there still are women who are, working on that role. A lot of the research comes out now because women are now in the fields of psychology. They're in the fields of sexual health. They're looking at things and becoming sexologists, where Prior to that, we didn't have women have access to the medical field. It was very rare. It was very, very rare. And several women, there's even a woman who in the 1800s lived as a man so she could practice medicine. There are a number of counts of things like that, though, right? So, uh, yeah, I don't know why that touches me hard, but there's been a lot of women who haven't had the chance, right? And having been given the chance, it would have probably opened up ideas and research and funding because you put women in those roles where they have the money and they have the access to the information, then they're going to be curious and invest in that. So it's starting because we've only started to have access. We are several hundred years behind men having access to all things medical. And we're several hundred years behind the medical system and other systems investing in women as being valuable. So we're behind. Yeah, am I being a feminist? Yeah, because why? We're talking about the 70s and the feminist movement, which actually had women demand that they have not just um, equal rights, which don't equal rights don't always work, but equity certainly can have a better chance. And I think there's also a choice. Some people don't want to be equal. They want to have a whole other look at it. So anyway, we have the movement of women caring for other women, and that's where things change. Where before we had men that would probably brush a lot of women off, which we still have that a lot in the medical system, where women are just dismissed with like, oh, it's just all in your head. Things like vaginismus, like painful, having a painful vagina, and different forms of painful sex too, like vulvodynia, having a painful vulva, having a painful vagina, all of that stuff was knocked down to, oh, it's all in your head. Now, there probably is trauma, 100%. There's going to be some trauma there. There might also be physical atrophy going on in the area. There might also be a lot of things that are impacting the physical body as well as the spirit of the woman and also her mental health. We can't just look at people as their body parts because it doesn't work that way. Your body parts are all connected to each other, and you got to look at it as a whole, as well as what's going on with your mind. What are you thinking? What are you holding on to? What are your belief systems? So spiritually, uh, how are you managing this? And so there's a lot of different aspects that need to be looked at. But the one good thing is that we're getting there. But the one bad thing is it's taking a very long time. And why is that? I truly believe that it has to do with the funding that has just not, nobody has found an interest in women's health because the money hasn't been there for women to have the money to go and buy, say, the Viagra for women or whatever it happened to be. So those things that would be health oriented are not as accessible because also women's sexual health is geared more towards whether somebody can be pregnant or not. So it has more to do with fertility than it has to do with pleasure. Drinking a lot of water today. If you're hearing pauses, I haven't dropped, guys. It's a hot one out there, and we are literally like kilometers from a forest fire right now. So there's hot air and yeah. So if I sound like I'm like on a rant, I'm on a rant. I'm also like pumped because ready to rock and roll at any minute. Okay, so now we're going to get into the 70s and 80s. What I remember in the 80s, which is kind of fun because I can talk about this from my own life perspective, is that there were talk shows that had people talking about all kinds of different things sexually. I remember one of my favorite episodes ever was on Sally Jesse Raphael, and she interviewed someone who, oh, for the life of me, I can't remember what their name was. But it was one of the first times I'd ever heard about intersex people. so Sally interviewed a person who was intersex, and she had also interviewed somebody who had been born with a clitoris, but somehow no, it was born with a penis, but then there was like an accident that happened. I think there was like a problem with having, or maybe the penis got cut off or something during a routine procedure, and then they were redesignated as female, and then grew up and then redesignated back to male. So yeah, all that kind of stuff that was out there. And there was also episodes on like shows like Geraldo, and there were episodes, oh, it was actually Jerry Springer, but he came around in the 90s. But like Jerry Springer had shows that were about kink that I had never in a million years thought was real. And then even after watching it, I thought these people have to be actors. But then in reality, there were kinks that I hadn't imagined were real that are now like flourishing. So one of them is the kink of being a baby. I remember seeing that, must have been around 1997 or 1998. As at the time I was actually living, I think, on my own, in a little bachelor in Toronto. And I don't know, I had Jerry Springer on, and there was this episode, and all of these things have fascinated me my whole life. So of course I'm going to sit down and watch that. And I think it was Geraldo who had on somebody who had died from a family member who had died from erotic asphyxiation, and it was the mother who was on talking about her son and how she'd found her son who had hung himself in the closet. But that was like his thing. It was an erotic thing for him to want to be asphyxiated. These were things I had never heard about, never even knew existed, but they all were out there. They were out on all these shows. These shows were available at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon because it was right after school. And I didn't have a lot of channels. We did not have cable. So for a year or two, we didn't have a TV at all. So when we did have TV, I was getting highly educated in all things from Oprah to Sally to all those shows. And I was getting my education. And we also had sex talk people. We had we had Sex with Sue in Canada, and then we also had Dr. Ruth Westheimer in the US. And there was probably a whole host of others who were sexperts talking about human sexuality in very open ways. And I have to say, they were like I'm like the biggest fan of Sue. She's passed on, but she's like such an inspiration. So the 90s were not just interesting in terms of Viagra being approved, but the 90s were super interesting in terms of information being available out there, kink and sexuality becoming more open, even people talking about sexuality more, like people were discussing things outside of heterosexuality more. So hearing terms like bisexual was kind of new for me in the 90s. And then hearing terms beyond that too. I think in the 90s was when I first met the first person that I knew who had who was a trans woman. And then I met a few other people that I was like, wow, I just, all these people were coming into my life, and it was fascinating. So maybe it was just my age at the time, or maybe it was just the openness of society at the time that people were able to be more open about it, and that was coming through. We also had in the 80s like the scare of AIDS as well, but for women were also excluded from a lot of that research too, because it was at first called the gay related disease, GRD, and then they realized, oh, it's not just gay men getting it. So yeah, and lesbians were some of the first ones to back the gay men and look after them and help them out. So that is one of the reasons why in LGBTQ the L comes first, in case you were wondering. So we've got the Viagra era, then we've got, a lot of money going into all the research for men, but, still a very small fraction going in for women. I think even at the time there was it Oprah? is Oprah. She had like 2 doctors on who would, do a lot of attempts at research to see if women were having orgasms, what was turning them on, and that sort of thing. So at least there was a trying to look at women's health. But the real push started in around 2004, and then in 2009 there was a bigger push that started to happen. And now there's a bigger push for advocacy for things like vulvodynia and persistent genital arousal disorder. I think that's PGAD. So that is now we actually have that happening with more interest and more people investing. But guys, I have to go to my next break, so we're going to do that. You're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show, with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for The Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. This is The Pleasure Zone with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@MilicaJelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet, sweet pleasure seekers. So I have to make an adjustment. I had said that there is no FDA-approved drug for women like Viagra, but I forgot there was one that came out in 2015, but you don't see or hear a lot about it, and it works in a very, very different way than Viagra does. So it goes by 2 names, flibanserin, I think I'm saying that right, and then another variation of it is spelled ADDYI, so ADDY, and it is considered to be the first FDA-approved drug for low sexual desire in premenopausal women. So not perimenopausal women, but or menopausal women. So it's definitely more geared with hormones, I would say. So what also happens around 2010s or so, we've got more discussions about menopause and how that affects bodies. But I think actually I don't really remember people discussing menopause that much until like the last 15 years, even though I knew, like, we all knew women went through menopause, but it wasn't like out there. You weren't reading articles about it. Now it's like it's everywhere. Maybe it's because I'm 50, I'm seeing it everywhere. I haven't even hit menopause, but maybe that's, I don't know, is that what happened to all of the women who came before me? Did you only start seeing the information when you were in that age range? Maybe. But we are starting to get more information out there. And because I haven't heard really a lot about that female Viagra, I don't even know how effective it is, because if it was super effective, you'd think you'd hear it, and then that name of it would become like as commonplace as the name Viagra, but it's not, is it? So we're looking at now the more like 2020s. So since COVID, what have we gotten? Well, we do know that the gap persists because things haven't changed that much. But what we do have is a lot more social media going on. We have a lot more people discussing all things about their sexual health and looking at sex from a different perspective, that not all sex has to be penetration related. What if you can play in different ways? What if we can look at touch in different ways? And we've got people with so many different ways to experience and play with bodies, to arouse bodies, that isn't centered around the genitals. And I think that's really important too, because for so long, arousal was centered and solely centered around the obvious erogenous zones. And now we're looking at the body as a whole and seeing like where is the situation that's stopping arousal, and maybe there is something going on that's a mental block, like a trauma that's sitting in the mind or a trauma that's sitting in the body. So we're looking at it very differently, and I love that it's changing a lot. But there's still a thing where it's like people get really kind of like offended by women even suggesting that they should have orgasms or even saying the word. Like you can't imagine how many people blush even if I say the word orgasm in their face. And it's not like I'm saying it in front of their grandmother. Just to women like my own age or men my own age, they will feel very uncomfortable. And it's part of conversations when people ask me what I do, and I say that I'm a sex and intimacy coach, and then they get all weird, and I'm like, okay, well, let's talk. Like, what's going on? But the conversations do get awkward, and people get really silent when you use certain words like orgasm. They go, God, it's like silent. Do we have to talk about that? So yeah, we do. Because you know what? The more we bring attention to it, the more people will be willing to hear about it, the more interest there is. Then it's like it's got its own marketing in a way, right? And so people are interested. They're wanting products. People are wanting to know what are the solutions. They want help. And for the most part, I do like the work of Masters and Johnson, the sensate work, where they say, if there are big problems, first take sex off the table. Take penetration sex off the table. Stay away from the genitals and try other things, because oftentimes it's really about getting present and getting to know the person, getting to know their body, enjoy their body as a whole experience, rather than that target of, I must make this person have an orgasm. And no, you mustn't. You don't have to. That's okay. So, man, I've been talking fast and furious, and I'm like heart's racing as if I've run on some kind of a marathon. But I can imagine, or I don't know if you can imagine, that, the pleasure gap is now. Like we're not talking about ancient history. We are talking about stuff that's happening right now, right here. And we're also talking about that there are cultural gaps as well, too. So yes, we might have information available in first world countries, but third world countries certainly aren't getting that information or access to anything that is available necessarily. And there may be cultural reasons for that as well. So lots of reasons why there is this gap, financial reasons, so many reasons. But if everybody asks and Pete starts talking about it, and I've been talking about this for 11 years, guys, I've been talking about sex and the importance of sexual expression and pleasure for years. And the more people who do, the more people are going to pay attention, and then we're going to actually get something to help, especially women who are having a hard time, who genuinely would love to have a pleasurable sex life, but are genuinely either in pain or they're having something psychologically going on where they need maybe to have some experts work on helping them through the traumas that are maybe preventing them from being aroused. Or maybe it really does come down to, maybe there is a cream that will work, like this new cream that's available for men for when they have a desensitized penis. But those same things can't go inside of a vagina. So don't use, if your partner happens to have that cream, don't be sticking it inside your vagina. It's not the same, kids. So yeah, it's different pH. You don't want to mess with that. So if you feel like this is a conversation that's needed more in the world, share this with as many people as you like. And if you feel like this is a conversation you'd like to have and you're an expert in this field, I'd love to have that conversation with you. I'm always looking for experts in the field of human sexuality, and different things to do with sex, for sure, to come and have conversations with me. I love to do that. And I love hearing new and interesting information. So please pass that on. Happy to.
Thank you for choosing to listen to The Pleasure Zone with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic. We'll return next Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Mountain Time and 5 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. We hope you'll join us. Until then, have the best week of your life by choosing to be turned on and tuned in to your body.